I never meant to notice her the way I did. At first, she was just a neighbor who sometimes beat me to the corner coffee shop, always with a book half open in one hand and a travel mug in the other. She sat by the window, not facing the street but angled just enough to see the reflection of people coming and going. That morning light always seemed to soften her, though her jaw stayed tight, like she was bracing against something no one else could see. I told myself it was coincidence that we arrived around the same time. But after the fourth morning in a row, it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. I ordered black coffee. She glanced up from her book and said, almost to herself, "He'll learn." I didn't know if she meant me or the barista who kept forgetting her order. The barista smiled nervously, corrected himself, and handed her the cup without asking. She caught me looking. Not in an accusing way. More like she was waiting to see if I'd say anything. I didn't. I folded the corner of my receipt until it tore in half. "First week in the neighborhood?" she asked finally. Her voice was calm, but it held that practiced curiosity, like she already knew the answer. "Yeah. 2 doors down," I said. "Ah. The graduate." She tapped her temple lightly. I remembered. She remembered. My landlord must have mentioned me. But still, the fact that she held on to that detail made something stir. Not attraction yet. Just the feeling of being seen, however briefly. I nodded, trying not to sound overeager. "And you?" "I've been here long enough," she said, shutting her book with a soft clap. "Too long, probably." The way she said it, like time was something that had been happening to her instead of with her, stuck with me. We didn't talk much more. She tucked her book into her bag, smoothed the corner of her sleeve, and stood. When she walked past, the faintest trace of her perfume trailed after her, something woody, nothing sweet. I stared at my coffee for too long. By the time I finally drank it, it was already cold. That night, I thought about texting an old friend. I even typed out, "It's quieter here than I expected." Then I deleted it. The words felt too heavy to send. Instead, I wandered onto the porch with a book I didn't read. The cicadas were loud. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then again. And then, over the fence, I heard her laugh. Not the careful voice from the cafe, but an unguarded sound, like someone who forgot for a moment that they were alone. I froze, holding my book tighter than I should have. The next morning, she was at the cafe again. This time she didn't look up until I sat down at the table across from hers. She raised an eyebrow. "You really like black coffee?" "I guess so." She studied me for a second, like she was weighing something. Then, without looking away, she said quietly, "You're too innocent for it. Coffee like that deserves someone who knows what they're asking for." Her eyes lingered, then flicked away as she lifted her cup. I didn't know how to answer. My hand tightened around the napkin until it crumpled into a small, wrinkled ball. She stood to leave, smoothing her bag strap over her shoulder. At the door, she paused, just long enough to look back. Not long enough to make it clear why. I thought that was the end. But when I got home, there was a message slipped under my door. Not typed. Handwritten. "Next time, try something with milk. It might surprise you." The next evening I found her on her porch, watering a small row of potted herbs. The air was warm, the sun just gone, leaving the sky bruised in purples and pinks. I hesitated on the steps, unsure if saying hi would be too much, or not enough. She glanced up when I finally cleared my throat. "You came to learn gardening tips now?" Her tone was light, but there was curiosity in the way her eyes lingered. "Thought I'd see if I can keep something alive," I said. "Ambitious," she said. Then softer. "Or desperate." We laughed quietly. The kind of laugh that leaves a small ache behind. I knelt to tie a loose strand of her tomato plant. She watched, hands resting on the watering can, but she didn't move closer or back away. Just watched. I felt the slight brush of her sleeve as I leaned over. It wasn't meant to mean anything, but it felt like it did. "I used to grow herbs with my mom," I said suddenly, surprising myself. She had this little garden behind our apartment. Basil, thyme, nothing fancy. Just quiet. She nodded, shifting her weight. Quiet can be underrated. She smiled faintly, almost sad. I've lived here long enough to know that. I wanted to ask more, about her life, her stories, but something stopped me. There was a line there, unspoken, a quiet risk I could sense. She was older. Divorced. This little connection, however innocent it seemed, could become complicated. We fell into silence. I traced a loose thread on my sleeve. She adjusted a leaf on one of her plants, careful, deliberate. The evening stretched lazily. You drink tea? She asked. I nodded. Yeah. Green. She disappeared inside for a moment, and returned with 2 chipped mugs. The steam rose between us. I held mine, noticed the warmth on my fingers. The ritual felt intimate without words, almost like an agreement that we existed in this small shared space. Sometimes I forget things I should remember, she said quietly. Names, birthdays, even meals I meant to cook. She shrugged, not looking at me. Not that it matters. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her confession wasn't meant to be fixed or commented on. It just hung there, soft and real. I imagined other scenarios in my head. What if I stayed longer? What if I touched her hand by accident? What if she looked at me like she'd looked at me in the cafe? The thoughts came, and I pushed them down, careful not to let them cross into voice or action. When she stood to carry her mugs back inside, our fingers brushed lightly. Just a flicker of contact, but it carried more than either of us said. I lingered a moment, noticing her hand in mine, the way her wrist moved, the quiet weight of her presence. I left without saying much else. The air was cooler by the time I got to my apartment, but I carried the warmth with me. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't see her for a few days after the tea on her porch. The quiet absence was heavier than I expected. When I passed her house on my way back from the library, she was there, crouched in the driveway, sweeping dry leaves into a neat pile. I stopped. She looked up, startled. For a moment I thought she might smile, but instead, she straightened quickly, brushing imaginary dirt from her pants. Hey, I said, too soft. Hey, she returned, clipped, careful. Her eyes flicked toward the street, then back to me. Something shifted, like she was testing a boundary she wasn't sure she wanted me to cross. I shuffled forward, hands in my pockets, and noticed the way her fingers hovered over the broom handle, not quite gripping it. She was nervous, though she hid it well. Quiet morning, I said, hoping to fill the silence. She didn't respond immediately. Then, I'm busy. Not a lie exactly. But the word felt like a shield. I wanted to ask her to stay, wanted to lean closer, wanted to, no, better not. Better not. I felt my heart in my throat, noticing how even the tip of her hair caught the sunlight. I imagined leaning in, letting a question slip, letting something small become something bigger. My fingers twitched. I didn't. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere. She flinched slightly. A reminder we weren't in our private bubble. I should go, I muttered. But I lingered anyway, shifting my weight. Her eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. And there it was, the pull and the resistance all in one heartbeat. She wanted to see me, wanted to speak, but something, fear, caution, past history, kept her tethered. I saw your note, I said finally, voice low. The coffee one. Her lips curved just slightly, enough that it wasn't quite a smile. She didn't answer. Just adjusted the strap of her bag and took a slow step back. A car passed down the street, and the moment fractured. The air felt thick, as if it had been holding its breath for us both. I imagined reaching for her hand. Imagined brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Imagined the faint warmth of her skin against mine. All those thoughts tangled in my chest. I shook my head slightly, trying to clear them. Then she turned, almost abruptly, and started walking toward her door. I followed, slower, hesitant. At the door, she paused. I stopped just a fraction of a step behind her. Our shoulders brushed. Almost deliberately. I began, but the word died. She tilted her head, her eyes searching mine. A flicker of something unspoken passed between us. My pulse raced. I could have leaned in. She could have. Something hung there, poised, fragile, unfinished. Instead, she opened the door, stepped inside, and left the screen door between us. The sound of it clicking shut echoed louder than it should have. I stayed on the porch a moment longer, tracing the outline of her figure through the glass. Almost. Not quite. That was enough. I saw her on the park bench that evening, the one tucked behind a cluster of maples where the sunlight spilled gold in the gaps. She was reading something on her phone, shoulders slightly hunched. I almost didn't go over, but curiosity and something heavier pulled me toward her anyway. Mind if I sit? I asked. She looked up. A small nod? No words, just a faint lift of her hand. The silence settled between us, thick but not unpleasant. I watched her fingers scroll the screen. Then, slowly, she set the phone aside. I saw him today, she said, voice low. Who? Her laugh was brief, humorless. Don't. It doesn't matter. I did matter. And I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap, noticing the way her elbow rested on her knee, the tension in her wrist. Did it make you feel anything? I asked, careful. She looked at me then, full gaze, and I almost panicked at the intensity. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe annoyed. Maybe something else. Don't read too much into it. But I did. I read every flicker across her face, every pause, every tiny hesitation. My chest tightened. I imagined her with someone else and couldn't tell if the ache was longing or fear, or guilt for feeling it. I shouldn't feel like this, she said finally, her voice almost breaking. I shouldn't care, and yet. She trailed off, eyes dropping to her hands. It's stupid. Immature. Not stupid, I said softly, barely audible. It's human. She lifted her gaze slowly, and for a moment, it was as if she was weighing whether to tell me the rest. I wanted her to. I wanted to know what she really felt, not just the careful version she handed out. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I didn't hold back, she admitted, whispering so quietly I had to lean closer to catch it. If I let things happen. But I can't. I shouldn't. You're young. I'm me. Her words lingered. My stomach twisted in that mix of longing and caution. I wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to tell her it was okay, that I didn't care about the risks, but I froze. We sat side by side in the quiet, leaves rustling around us. I thought about everything we hadn't said. The brushed sleeves, the shared tea, the notes slipped under doors. All of it felt like a thread leading somewhere we weren't allowed to go. I don't know why this matters so much, I said finally, almost to myself. Neither do I, she whispered back. Her eyes didn't leave mine. There was a pause, a pregnant, aching pause. She shifted slightly closer, and I felt the warmth of her presence. My chest wanted to move, to close the distance, but the world pressed in with caution. Then she looked down, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. A small laugh, like a sigh. Maybe some things are better left, imagined, she said. And in that moment I wanted to ask. Wanted to hear it all. But the words stayed lodged in my throat, hovering. Would she let me in if I asked? I didn't know. The next week, everything shifted. I stopped seeing her on the porch, at the cafe, even in the hallway of our little street. At first, I told myself she was busy. Maybe she had errands, meetings, a life that didn't revolve around our quiet exchanges. But the absence was sharp, more noticeable than any presence. I went to the cafe one morning, hoping. The barista looked at me with that same apologetic smile. She hasn't come by, she said. I nodded, cradling my cup. My mind wandered to imagine explanations, family, illness, a sudden trip. None felt quite right. Then I saw her briefly, from my window. She was walking past my apartment with a small child holding her hand. A boy, maybe 6 or 7, bouncing slightly on his steps. My chest tightened. A child. Something she'd never mentioned. Something that explained the careful distance, the hesitation, the invisible boundary I'd been circling without fully seeing. I wanted to knock on her door, to ask to see. But the weight of unspoken rules pressed down. I stayed inside. The walls seemed smaller, the floorboards louder under my steps. I found myself writing messages I couldn't send. I saw you. I saw him. The rest remained blank. My thumb hovered over the send button more times than I can count. Eventually, I deleted the drafts, over and over, like erasing footprints in sand before the tide could come. On the street, I saw her reflection in a shop window. She glanced at me, and for a heartbeat, the warmth returned. But her hand went to the boy's shoulder, guiding him forward. She smiled not at me, but at him. I felt a pang that was more complicated than jealousy. More like recognition that there were layers here I hadn't accounted for. Days bled into evenings. The porch swing sagged empty. The tea mugs were untouched. The note I had written, intending to slip it under her door, stayed folded in my pocket. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. I imagined all the conversations that would never happen, all the glances that would now pass unremarked. The air carried a faint sense of waiting that would never be answered. One evening, I walked past her house and saw the curtain twitch. I stopped, wondering if she'd seen me, if she was thinking of me, or if the life I imagined beside her never existed at all. The child laughed inside. A sound so ordinary, so domestic, it made the empty space where we might have been feel sharper, more delicate. I turned away, leaving the porch unseen, the door unknocked, my heart in a kind of suspension. The moment hung there, unresolved, fragile, like a book left open on the last page, waiting for someone to return. But knowing they wouldn't, I found her on the porch again, late afternoon, the sun low and soft. She was kneeling beside a pot, carefully pruning a small shrub. I paused at the gate, unsure whether to announce myself. She looked up, saw me, and for a second didn't move. Then she gave a faint nod, just enough to say, "You can come closer if you want." I stepped onto the porch slowly, aware of each movement, as if I could break something delicate with a wrong gesture. She stayed kneeling, hands resting on the soil. "I didn't mean to disappear," I said finally, voice low. She looked down, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Life gets complicated," she said softly. "I didn't want to drag you into it." I didn't respond. My chest felt tight. I wanted to ask about the boy, about the mornings she'd vanished, about the space she'd left in my week. But the words were too heavy, and I wasn't sure I had the right to speak them. We sat in silence for a while. My fingers traced the edge of the railing. The faint smell of earth and her perfume mingled in the warm air. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought about you. A lot." I froze. The simple sentence carried more weight than anything else she'd ever said. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. The vulnerability in her voice, an admission without demand, was enough to crack something in me. "I thought about you too," I admitted. The words were awkward, hesitant, but true. She let a slow exhale escape, and for a moment, the porch was quiet except for the distant hum of the street. She looked at me, eyes searching. "You could leave. I wouldn't blame you," she said. I wanted to stay. I wanted to lean closer, to brush my hand against hers, but I also knew how fragile this moment was. How easy it would be to shatter it with impatience or expectation. Instead, I just nodded. "I'm here," I said. She tilted her head slightly, studying me. Then a faint smile, almost imperceptible, tugged at the corners of her lips. Not a smile of victory or relief, just recognition. Something human, honest, earned. We stayed that way, close but not touching, sharing the quiet without speaking. The air between us carried more than words ever could: hesitation, longing, understanding. Finally, she stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. She leaned slightly against the railing. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," I echoed. It wasn't dramatic. No grand gestures, no declarations. But in that simple exchange, the walls had lowered. We had chosen to exist in the same space, acknowledged each other, and left room to breathe. And for now, that was enough. Weeks passed. The leaves shifted from gold to brown, then fell entirely, leaving the branches bare and the air crisp. Our routines, tentative at first, settled into something quiet and familiar. I found myself at the cafe again, black coffee in hand, the barista nodding at me like an old friend. She walked in behind me, carrying her usual travel mug. She glanced at me, and that small, almost imperceptible smile made the morning feel warmer than it should. Later, we sat on the park bench behind the maples, the one where sunlight spilled in patches through the branches. The bench creaked under our weight. I sipped my green tea. She held her coffee like a shield, then lowered it, letting the warmth reach her hands. We didn't need to talk. The silences had become comfortable, meaningful. Words were optional. The boy waved at her from across the street and ran off to a friend, giving us a small, ordinary bubble of time just for ourselves. I remembered the first note she had left under my door, telling me to try milk in my coffee. I smiled faintly at the memory. It had been such a small gesture, but it marked the beginning of all this. The awareness, the patience, the slow learning of each other's rhythms. She nudged her mug toward mine, a silent offer of shared warmth. I took it, letting my fingers brush hers briefly. Nothing dramatic, just a touch that said more than words ever could. "Do you remember the bench?" she asked softly. "Every morning," I said. "Even the quiet ones." She chuckled lightly, the sound carrying that same warmth I'd noticed weeks ago. I like our quiet mornings. Even if they start with black coffee I still pretend to dislike." I nodded. "I like them too. Even when I forget to text, or overthink everything." We laughed softly, the kind of laugh that didn't need an audience. It was ours, and it felt earned. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Our interactions were punctuated by small, ordinary things. The way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the way I poured tea just slightly too hot for her cup, the way we both lingered at the threshold of her porch before leaving. Nothing monumental. Nothing perfect. But real. One morning, I arrived at 8:47 a.m., coffee in hand, and found her already seated on the bench, watching the sun hit the maple branches. We exchanged no words for a long moment, just the rhythm of breathing and the quiet acknowledgement that we were here, together. And in that simple shared space, I felt it. The ache of earlier longing had softened into something quieter, gentler, sustainable. I didn't need a confession. I didn't need a declaration. Just this, shared presence, shared routines, and the tiny, almost invisible moments that told me we had built something lasting. As she stirred her tea and looked at me, the corners of her lips lifted, and I thought maybe this is what it's always meant to be: small gestures, quiet mornings, black coffee, and someone who truly sees you. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?